Hello, I'm Callie Kraft. I'm one of our psychoeducational consultants. I'm going to be digging a bit deeper with you into phonics, which the National Reading Panel found to be another essential component of reading. Phonics refers to the teaching of sound symbol relationships. It involves the process of sounding out unfamiliar words by converting letters or graphemes into sounds or phonemes and blending those sounds together. Based on the National Reading Panel's review of 38 studies on phonics instruction, they found that systematic phonics instruction gave children a faster start to learning to read than incidental instruction. So what I mean by incidental instruction is that it's not planned, but through maybe a guided lesson, the teacher realizes that a student is struggling with a particular phoneme-grapheme connection, so it does a lesson in response to that need. A systematic approach ensures that there is no gaps in a student's understanding of the code. The results also revealed that phonics instruction should be taught from kindergarten to grade 2 for all students and then beyond that for struggling readers. One thing I also wanted to mention is that the National Reading Panel does not suggest that these pillars have to be taught in isolation, and I think our curriculum team has done a great job of promoting the need for explicit instruction while also finding ways for us to integrate all of these key components of reading and weaving it throughout the day for our students. So what programs are most effective? Even with the meta-analysis like this, where they are looking at many different studies, it wasn't possible for them to determine which specific programs were more effective than others. What is important is that they all seem to work. So it's not about a program, it's about having the knowledge to be able to implement the necessary ingredients to achieve optimal results for our students. So I don't mean to take away from the fact that programs help move this process along. Of course, we don't want to have to be reinventing the wheel, but when using programs, we need to be doing so with an understanding of why we're using them. Some additional research that I think is worth touching on is that children can learn phoneme-grapheme connections faster than we think. Children don't need to spend a whole week on one sound. There is research that suggests that an optimal rate of introducing new letter sounds is at least 3 times faster than the rate of one letter sound per week. Something to keep in mind with this is that we would never just teach a sound and then leave it alone for the next week. We are constantly reviewing and integrating it with new learning. They also found that young children had no problem when taught early that 2 letters can represent one sound, as in CH for ch and SH for sh. So I think this is really important because the sooner we can introduce this concept, the better. They will be more flexible thinkers and not get stuck in thinking that only one letter can represent one sound. And it opens the door to learning more words that they will be encountering frequently. Drawing students' attention to the articulatory features of sounds, so what our mouth and our tongue are doing when we are making new sounds, as well as using embedded picture mnemonics, which are the key pictures that are in the shape of a letter sound, so an S in the shape of a snake or an L in the shape of a ladder. These supports seem to really help letter sound knowledge and ultimately orthographic mapping, which is the process involved in storing words in our memory. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that while working on blends with a student for the purpose of developing their speech is really important because blends can be tricky sounds to articulate. Teaching blends in phonics instruction is an unnecessary step that just adds to the student's cognitive load. Blends are really just consonants that are next to each other in a word and make 2 sounds. So if they know each individual phoneme, grapheme, or letter sound, and they know how to blend, they really don't need to learn that ST makes st as if it was something different. Okay, so English is not crazy. We often hear that people say that English is crazy and you have to just memorize the words. So not only is English not crazy, but teaching through a sight word approach is not consistent with how words are remembered. Words with consistent or predictable letter patterns account for about 50% of all texts. Then when we consider words with only one irregular letter sound connection, or when we consider the word origin or meaning, researchers suggest that only about 4% of words are truly crazy. English is a morphophonemic language, which is a code that represents both sound and meaning. So while phonics is necessary, it's not sufficient. In addition to teaching the phoneme-grapheme correspondences and how to break down a lengthy word into more manageable syllables or chunks for reading, it's also important that we help our students become word detectives and investigate the meaning of words. So morphology is the study of the smallest unit in a word that holds meaning. which is a morpheme. This would include prefixes like die and try and un, and suffixes like ed, ing, and s, as well as root words. And etymology is the study of the origin of words, which gives us good insight into the word meaning. In our example here, we have the different ways we could help a student figure out a word. The student could decode the word sound by sound, and as their skills develop, they can also learn to break the word down into syllables for multisyllable words. Instruction in morphology also helps us break the word down into meaningful units. So in our example here, if we learn that orthos in Greek means correct, and graphos means writing or mark, this gives us really good insight into the fact that orthography likely has something to do with the correct spelling of a word. I think the common view that we learn to read in K-2, maybe 3, and then we transition to read to learn beyond that, I think is an oversimplification that we need to be careful of. In fact, we continue to learn to read beyond this as well. So though we know that phonics instruction is recommended for K-2 students, and then beyond that for students who continue to struggle with this skill, word study or morphology and etymology should continue on well beyond this for all students. Not just in language arts, but in content area classes as well. So for example, they may learn the meaning of the root sphere and how it relates to concepts in math, but also in science, they can connect it to words like atmosphere, stratosphere, geosphere. This not only helps students recognize larger parts of words quickly and deepen their understanding of the words, but it also helps make sense of the spelling. There are some words that they will encounter that based on typical spelling rules would be considered an irregular word, like the word people. In people, there's a silent O. So if we look into the etymology or the origin of the word, we find out that it is from the Latin word populus, and the O is maintained in the spelling of the word to show that it is connected to this word in meaning. We can see how it is then connected to other words like popular and population. Okay, so oral language develops naturally while reading needs to be taught explicitly. Our brains are hardwired for speech, not for reading. Most developmentally typical children will learn to speak just through exposure and immersion in language. But unlike learning to speak or learning to crawl or walk, we are not hardwired in our brains to know how to read naturally. It is something that needs to be taught. And what we know from decades of research is that explicit and systematic instruction is more effective than incidental learning through exposure of great books. So while the recommendation to read more to your child is great and will help develop their vocabularies and their background knowledge and will help support the word learning process, it's not enough. When we think about how written words are remembered through a connection forming process between letters, the sounds, and the meaning, we can't gloss over the letter-sound connections and go right to the meaning. Emily Hanford, who wrote Hard Words, said, "While we use our eyes to read, the starting point for reading is sound." So when introducing new letter sounds, teach the way our brain is wired to learn, speech to print, not print to speech. Okay, so what do we know? We know that written print was developed to represent language, not the other way around. We come to school with a sophisticated language system already in place. We need to be drawing our students' awareness to the individual sounds in our spoken language that they already have access to and anchor it to the letters. We want to encourage children to attend to the internal structure of the word, all the letters, and discourage predicting and guessing. We know that explicit and systematic instruction is a necessary component to learning to read. What the research is not settled on is what is the best order for this systematic instruction. So without this specific guidance, it makes sense based on what we know to organize our instruction by sounds, as it is less overwhelming and more focused for both the teacher and the student. And we know that information is easier to remember when it's organized in a meaningful way. So rather than teaching the graphemes AY, OE, and TH one week, we are teaching one sound and how that sound can be represented in print. So for the long A sound, we may teach A with a silent E as in cake, AI as in rain, and AY as in day. So should we be using predictable stories for beginning readers? The use of predictable stories for beginning readers undermines phonics instruction and sends the message that predicting words based on the first letter only or picture is a viable option. These strategies may give the illusion of reading temporarily, but it just won't hold up for many of the students who need explicit instruction. So for our students just beginning to learn to read, where it's still a bit shaky, we want to give them text that they can access. So I would encourage you to take a look at some of the words within those A to D leveled books and think about whether or not your student has the letter sound knowledge to access those texts. We sometimes hear people say that decodable books are boring and not motivating for their kids, but whose lens is that view coming from? Is it coming from ours as successful, skilled readers, or from the child who is just learning to read? We need to think about what the purpose is for the text we select and make sure that the entry point is accessible. This is what gives them the genuine sense that they are learning to read and what helps them feel confident and motivated to read. It's the thrill of the skill. And this is really just the starting point. So think of it as a stepping stone or training wheels. We would never put our 4-year-old on a bicycle and expect them just to pick it up. Of course, our goal is not to leave the training wheels on. We want to get them to reading all of those wonderful texts that we put in front of them. And we can't forget that there are 5 pillars. So while we are helping them learn to decode and lift words off the page, we should also be reading more complex text to the students to continue to build their language skills, their vocabulary, background knowledge, and critical thinking skills. So I'm going to show you a video now of a student reading without pictures, and I want you to watch for her reaction.
What do you notice on the next page?
Ah!
Why did you do that? Why did you do that reaction? Tell me why. What made you go, ah?
There's no picture.
Oh my goodness, so how are you going to read it? Let's see. What are you going to do? Let's see what strategies you have.
We could flip over the page.
Do you really need to?
Maybe.
Maybe? Why don't you just try it without the pictures? Okay, so let's just see.
One day, E was
Oops. That's the paw sound.
saw eating nectar. Went. What are you doing?
Okay, I'm going to stretch it. Let's do the first sound. S. Look at it.
Screamed. Bees do not eat sweet nectar, but I like eating sweet nectar, said Lee. I do not want to be a flea. I want to be a bee.
Wait a minute. What did you just do?
I read it
Please
without.
check your pieces to make sure any extras, just bring them to the office.
Yeah. What did you just do there?
I read it without the page.
Without the page
Yeah,
or the pictures?
without the pictures.
How do you feel about reading without pictures?
I feel
Is it a
good.
thumbs up? You feel good? Yeah. Because you know what, Elaine? You can, by looking at those words and making those sounds, you can read without those pictures. Congratulations. I'm going to even prove it to you. Look at this. There's a picture there. Oh my goodness. So I'm going to cover it up. I'm going to cover it up. And you are going to read without the pictures. And you're going to use the words on the page. Here you go.
Come with me to my hive, said Bee. You can eat
Mm-hmm.
the queen bee. We can see if you will let you live in our hive.
Oh, and you read hour. not word.
The hive.
Good job. Keep going. I'm going to stop now.
So I think this video nicely showed how reliant our students can become on pictures, but with the right support and eyes on print, the picture really isn't needed for reading the words. Now we're going to talk about Aries phases of reading development. So Aries phases of word reading development are phases that children quite predictably pass through as they learn to read. They're overlapping and not discrete phases. So a child can be in more than one phase at a time. So while your students may go through the pathway at different rates and with more or less difficulty, we all require the same underlying skills and go through the same route to becoming a successful reader. I think these phases are really important for us to understand and to talk about because oftentimes we can put the cart before the horse and employ strategies that they're not yet ready for. We want to look at where are their skills along this pathway and where can we focus our instruction. All kids need to pass through these phases to develop a strong foundation of the underlying skills needed to read words instantly and accurately. The first phase of Aries' theory of reading development is the pre-alphabetic phase. At this stage, children do not yet have the letter sound knowledge to map words to permanent memory, or even the insight that letters are important and actually represent the sounds within words. Instead, they use the visual or contextual cues to remember words. So the golden arches they may know as McDonald's, or they may see the Toys R Us logo and recognize that right away. But when environmental cues like logos and distinctive print are removed and the word is presented by itself, they can no longer read it. In one study, they actually changed the P to an X on a can of Pepsi, and children who were in this phase couldn't detect that change and thought it still said Pepsi. So at this phase, they really have no concept of letters and sounds, and they read the environment rather than the print. The pre-alphabetic phase of word reading is typical of preschool to early kindergarten students. The most telling sign that your students are in this phase is their lack of letter sound knowledge. So with practice, they may learn some words, but the words are quickly forgotten since the word is not learned in the way that we store them in memory. Phonological awareness tasks for students at this level can really help move them along. So things like clapping words in a spoken sentence, blending syllables, rhyming, and recognizing words that begin with the same sound can be very helpful. For children at this phase, we also want to be developing concepts about print and print awareness, tracking words on the page, and working on letter naming and matching activities. Once your student starts to develop the insight that letters represent sounds in spoken words, they move into the partial alphabetic phase, which typically occurs in kindergarten to early grade 1. And at this phase, they rely on partial phonetic cues in reading words. So when seeing a word that starts with the letter B and a picture of a barn, the student may be able to guess the word barn. Okay, this is also reflected in their spelling. You've likely seen evidence of this when a child excitedly writes you a story, which looks more like a string of random letters. But for your student, they are the letter sounds that make sense and stand out the most to them. It's often the beginning or the ending sounds that are most easily detected. The other letters and sounds in the word are not yet as easily attended to. So they likely wouldn't be able to read back to you what they wrote unless they're recalling the story from memory. Letter names are also used at this stage to support their spelling. So we see this when students write just the letter B for the word bee or the letter U for the word you. They may also write the sounds that stand out the most to them, which, like I said, is often the first and last sounds in a word. And you probably can't read this red piece of paper here, but it was something my oldest son wrote when he was in this phase. He drew 2 stick figures, which were his Nana and Pappy, and he wrote the letters N-A-U-E-P-A-P underneath. So initially when he showed it to me, I said, "Oh, that looks great. I see that you wrote Nana and Pappy. Is this letter here," meaning the U, "is this an N?" Thinking that maybe he inversed it. And I'll never forget the look on his face. He looked at me as if I had 5 heads and he said, "No, Nana." So you can see he didn't perceive that second N sound, but he sure heard that last sound. Then he wrote the letter E for the word and for Pappy, he wrote P-A-P. So he got the first 2 sounds, P-A, and for the last 2 sounds in the word E, he wrote the letter P, which makes sense given that they tend to use letter names to represent sounds. Letter names at this stage are also used as a clue to its sound. So generally, the letter sounds that are at the beginning of its name are easier to remember. So P, P, you can hear that P sound at the beginning of P. And with T, 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 you can hear that T at the beginning of T, and same with K, K, K. When the sound comes at the end, this also seems to help. M, L, S. What seems to be the trickiest for students to remember is letter sounds that are not found within the letter name at all. So there's no sound in H. Okay, same with W and Y. We don't hear those sounds within the letter name. And you may find that some of your kids may actually confuse those two sounds, because what sound do you hear at the beginning of Y? So it's not surprising when we see this confusion. I'm going to show you a video now of my other son who is currently within this phase of reading. He's reading a decodable story.
Pig. W A.
With.
With.
So a pig with.
B. A. G. B. A. B. A. B. Big.
Close. B. E. B.
Bib.
Bib. A pig with a bib.
A. 6.
Oh, good job.
On. Pen.
Whoa! A pig with a bib sits on a pin.
A. G. B. E. Pets.
So you can see he knows some letter sound connections, and he's developing his ability to blend sounds together. And while he's definitely attending to many of the letter sounds, sometimes he may ad-lib a bit and add in words or letters that aren't there. So it's not shown in this video, but he sometimes likes to start on the right page. So directionality is something that's still emerging for him. And if you noticed, for the word with, he said W it. So there's a few pieces of information that we can gather just from this word. So if you'd like, pause the video and take a minute just to see what kind of information you can glean from this. Okay, so right away we see that he hasn't mastered the W sound, which we know is one of the trickier sounds to remember. We can see that he has quickly identified the word it. So he's already beginning to recognize that as a unit. And we can also see that he doesn't know yet the two letters TH together make the th sound. So to help your students move into the full alphabetic phase, we really want to continue working on building their phonological awareness skills at the individual phoneme level to help them hear every sound in a word. We also want to be systematically growing their letter sound knowledge. So we may do activities that promote segmenting, blending, and manipulating of sounds and letters, as well as providing opportunities for invented spelling. This also helps draw their attention to the sequence of sounds and words and their connections to letters. The more connections we can form, the better. Students from mid to late grade 1 are typically within the full alphabetic phase. At the full alphabetic phase, reading seems so effortful as they read sound by sound, but they do tend to get there. At this stage, they have a more stable and complete understanding of the letter sounds or phoneme graphemes. And though they can sound out and blend the sounds together to read a word, many of the words have not yet become instantly recognizable words for them. Accuracy and automaticity of word recognition begins to emerge at this stage, and their spelling is stronger for words with conventional spelling, but they may not yet be able to recall the spellings for words with irregular or more complex spelling patterns. Support with learning to manage multisyllable words and lots of practice reading will contribute to fluency in word recognition. At the consolidated phase from late grade 1 to early grade 3, recurring letter patterns or chunks of words become consolidated or unitized. So they now have the skills to instantly recognize a word family pattern or a prefix or suffix or a root word. At this stage, we are simultaneously processing the letter sounds and the meaning of a word so that as soon as we lay eyes on a word, it is read and understood. Airy discusses the advantages of this process for reducing memory load, which of course is our end goal, so that the more focus can be spent on comprehending what it is we're reading. This is when we see their word reading really take off, as they're now able to instantly recognize whole words and larger chunks within words, and they can also learn through analogy. So if I know the word talk, then I know walk. So the more they read, the more they're able to teach themselves additional words. At this level, instruction in both reading and spelling should provide deeper focus on developing their knowledge of morphemes and etymology or word origin, because not only will this help unlock the larger units within words, it also gives us good insight into the meaning of a word, which will support comprehension and spelling. We know not every student will progress through these phases as easily as others. So I wanted to leave you with this quote from Dr. Sally Shaywitz, a prominent reading researcher. Teaching a dyslexic child to read is based on the same principles used to teach any child to read. Since the neural systems responsible for transforming print into language may not be as responsive as in other children, however, the instruction must be relentless and amplified in every way possible so that it penetrates and takes hold. So once we've identified where along the pathway the student falls and what underlying skills they're lacking, these skills need to be directly addressed. It's not about teaching them differently, it's about providing them with opportunities that are relentless and amplified. These are our kids who need more opportunities to develop these skills with more focus and intensity and for longer periods of time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for spending this time with me learning a little bit more about phonics.